with us?
Are we live?
Yes, we are. Hello and welcome back to Conference and our session on A for Acquisitions with the lovely Louie Stowell. Um, During this session, Louie and I are going to be chatting about the inner workings of publishing, where her insights will be invaluable given the fact that she can discuss this from both sides of the fence. As she mentioned to me before going live, this means that she knows exactly what conversation happened in the covers meeting when she hears a sanitised version. So I think we might come to that later, Louie. Yeah. Okay, so we'll leave time for questions at the end, and if you'd like to pop those in the ask a question box at the bottom of the screen, that will be a lot easier for us to monitor rather than putting them in the chat down the side. But you'll all be old hat at this by now anyway. And I should also mention that we've been supporting Britain's National Home for Children's Books, 7 Stories, over the weekend, and that if you would like to donate to them, there's a button on the screen to do so just at the bottom again. So a bit more about Louie. She spent 15 years in the publishing industry, most recently as publisher at Ladybird, part of Random House, before becoming a full-time author. She's written dozens of non-fiction books for children, so it might be interesting to explore that side of things as well, the fiction versus the non-fiction. And is the author of The Dragon in the Library trilogy, is the first one here, published by Nosy Crow. These are funny books about wizards, dragons, libraries and friendship. And her next book, publishing in May this year, is a darkly funny middle grade portal fantasy called Otherland, about 2 children who have to rescue a stolen baby from the fairy queen in a realm where nothing is as it seems. She also has a 3-book deal with Walker for a funny diary series about the Norse god Loki being punished by living on Earth as a mortal child and worse, going to school, which sounds fantastic. As well as living with her wife Karen and dog Buffy, she says she also lives with a creepy puppet that is probably cursed. So yes, we might want to start there.
So he's got a little axe, and also 1 foot and 1 hoof. And I remember I bought him in a charity shop and not slept well ever since. Also, people are making fun of my mug. I can't believe I'm getting mocked for my mug.
So anyway, welcome Louie. Thank you so much for joining us today. And we thought maybe you could start by telling us a little bit about your life as an author and how this has been affected by your industry experience.
Right, so it's sort of like, it's a very double-edged sword because I love, it's very useful to have all that information in the background, but also you sort of, because you know what's happening, it's sometimes scarier. So for instance, last time I went on submission, I could exactly picture what was happening in all the acquisitions meetings, because in parallel I was sitting in acquisitions meetings, and I know how nerve-wracking it is, for instance, for the editor who's pitching it, that it's not just the author who's sitting there scared, it's also the editor who's, kind of putting their heart out there and really kind of presenting something they believe in that the sales department could always go, nah. So I think it sort of actually helped in having empathy for the editors as well, because I know that they're, really overstretched, and also like they're often as emotionally invested as you are, but that doesn't mean that they can get it past the sales department and the other kind of voices in the acquisitions room.
Great. Kyle says he wasn't mocking, he was impressed. So.
That's all right then. The puppet will leave you alone.
Okay, so I know there are lots of different departments with specific roles in a publishing company. Can you give us a bit more of an overview to start with about what a publisher actually does, and then we'll drill down into the various different departments?
Yeah, so my job, publisher, is helpfully the same name as the business. So I am a publisher who works for a publisher. Basically, your job there is to kind of oversee all the acquisitions and the books that get published. So you're deciding what's getting published, when to publish it. And I say you're deciding that, which makes it sound like you're just doing it on your own, but actually it's very much in the context of a wider team. So you, the publisher, would work with the sales department, the design department, the rights department, the export sales, which is sales to Australia and India and other English language places, and basically the marketing department, the PR department, and then often the kind of senior management team who will make those final decisions. So when I decide to publish something, that means I would take it to acquisitions with my heart in my mouth and have to persuade all the different people to get on board with my vision for it. which often means doing a lot before the acquisitions meeting. So you do a lot of kind of, sidling up to the head of sales and being like, so I've got this exciting book. You really want it? You really want it? Yeah, yeah. So I'd say like everything within publishing, especially children's publishing, is very collaborative. So it's very rarely just one person making a decision. It's quite a collective decision, and you need the enthusiasm from everyone. You need sales to be super enthusiastic, they can sell loads. You need rights to be enthusiastic, that they can sell it in like every territory in the world. Sorry, has there already been a session on rights where I've explained how that works? Shall I?
We've had a foreign rights session earlier in the weekend, but I don't know if everybody would have seen that. So
Maybe
there
I'll
might be a
just do
little
a
bit of
very quick
overlap.
rundown with what the
Sure.
department do. Okay, so editorial, you can probably guess what they do, but they bring in the books and decide which ones to publish from their editorial judgment point of view. Design work with editorial. In the context of colour publishing, as in things like picture books, those two departments work incredibly closely together, because you can't do a picture book by just editing it and then handing it over to the design team. You need to be talking about the layout at quite an early stage. The rights team are basically a team of experts in different foreign markets. So their job is talking to publishers in other countries who will then buy books from the rights department, normally at book fairs where you go travel there, or at the moment you don't travel anywhere, you just sit on Zoom. So they're basically selling the rights to translate books, which depends on authors giving the publisher those rights. So if you, as an author, say, give your sell world rights to a publisher, they will then sell them on through the rights department. Then there's the sales team, which means normally UK sales. So they sell to Waterstones, supermarkets. Then you sometimes have special sales, which means they sell to the discount retailers. So your Costco, the Works, anything like that, where it's kind of in bulk. Export, they're sort of connected to the UK sales team, and they tend to sell to often kind of like other wings of the same publisher. So you might kind of like, Penguin UK might give, do export to Penguin Australia. So that's not so much selling rights as just kind of, distributing in that territory. Production, very important. Obviously, put all the books together, test that they're safe, which is especially important with younger books because you don't want babies choking on stuff. And also just like, a designer might do a fabulous cover where they're actually like, that's going to tear in if you get it into the shops. So I think they're kind of always there to be like the voice of reason in things, and also to deal with the fact that the books actually have to move around. So like a lot of books are printed in China, so you have to, literally put them on a ship to bring them over here, which takes a very long time. Black and white books tend to be printed in the UK, which is a little bit quicker. So production, the production team's job's a bit easier, except when there's Brexit and then lorries can't get through. So never fun. I think that's the main departments, but then there's also the fact that you often have the kind of senior management team who will have the final say on things. So you have like an MD or a CEO, someone at the top who may have come through different routes. They often seem to come through editorial routes, but sometimes they come through sales, and they're basically the yes or no at the end. And all that, what they're thinking about is not the individual books, not the publishing program, but how much money are we going to make, which
business again, at the end of the day. So
which was the publisher's job as well. So I think that's sort of something that I think it's very easy to think that, getting published or not getting published is about merit, and it has absolutely nothing to do with that. I mean, a limited amount, but basically it's about, is your book marketable? Does someone believe they can sell lots of copies of it? Or sometimes do they believe it'll win lots of awards because it makes them look good, even if it doesn't sell that many copies? But normally it's about, are we going to sell 50,000 copies of this? Then yes, we will buy it.
So that's just jumping on that, actually, when you say about 50,000 copies, how do you determine the success of a book? Is that kind of like the benchmark, or what's the average amount of sales for books these days, do you think?
So I'm not sure about average, but let's say it's a bit of an equation between how much you pay for the book and how much it sells.
Okay.
So if you pay a large sum for the book, it has to sell an awful lot. So, if you paid £1 million, it would have to sell more than most books would. That would be kind of like, not quite Williams levels, but, I don't know, I haven't done the sums, but let's say 100,000 copies. I haven't, but please do not quote me on these figures because I am pulling them out of the air. But I think you would say a publisher was like pretty damn pleased with 20,000 copies of a middle book, say. And picture books, I mean, to be honest, 3,000 is solid sales for, kind of like a lot of picture books sell around that. But like once you get into like, up to 50,000, that's great. That's super exciting.
Well, Casey says she's going to quote you exactly on that.
No, I said nothing. I was never here. It's all right, I've left publishing now. You can't. Yeah. So anyway, I think basically, okay. So let's say that we use something called Nielsen TCM to look at the figures of sales, and you can look at charts of that, so you can kind of filter it down to see, say, novels for children age 9 to 12. And I would say like the top few are always David Walliams, and they're always in the kind of like hundreds of thousands or whatever. And then you kind of drop down a few, and then you're getting into like 50,000 territory. And basically anything between 100,000 and about 15,000 is, good to amazing. And I think, sort of, a book that sells 1,000 copies is not going to make any money unless, I don't know, actually. Even if you paid very little for it, that's still not going to necessarily make money, because you've got to put, basically you've got to pay for the book to be printed. Sometimes you pay for it to be put into particular store placements. So, if you want it in W.H. Smith's charts, you've got to pay for that. If you want it in supermarkets, you often have to pay a bit of that for that as well. Waterstones, you don't have to pay anything. So when like authors like, how do I get onto the Waterstones table? You can't pay for it. So in a way, that's quite good. Like basically, that if you're with a small publisher who doesn't have a big budget, Waterstones is quite a good place for you, because you don't actually have to spend to get in there. You just have to have the right kind of book for the tastes of the Waterstones buyers.
Okay, well, that's good to know. So when you were talking about the acquisitions meetings, and I know that it's not just in a big publisher particularly, it wouldn't just be yourself that'd be going in pitching a book that you love. There would be other people doing the same thing, wouldn't they? So
yeah.
I would imagine it would get quite competitive, and I'm sure a lot of writers would love to be a fly in the wall at these sessions.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating. So actually, just a quick one on the difference between acquisitions in different publishers. It varies wildly, such that I remember going on an editorial conference and discovering that someone from one of the US publishers didn't have acquisitions at all. They're just like, let's just publish this. Let's talk to sales guys. Okay, do it. So there are places where it is much more fluid. And I think in smaller publishers, they probably have an acquisitions meetings, but sometimes they wouldn't, or it would be a lot more kind of it's like the attitude of let's do the show right here, just a bit more kind of, because there's just fewer people to be persuaded of things. So once you've persuaded the people in the room, that's enough. Whereas the people in the acquisitions room, there might be like 20, 30 people, kind of just watching. So in terms of what was your original question about acquisitions? It was
well, just if give us some of the juiciness about being a fly in the wall and these things, kind of what actually does happen. Because a lot of writers won't be privy to these, obviously, and I know you'd be competing against, if a publisher has a budget that they can only produce a certain amount of books per month or per year or something, then obviously not all of them are going to get through, are they? So.
Yeah. So normally the company will have a strategy, depending on how organized the company is. So the first thing you've got to ask as an editor is, does this book meet that strategy? So just to make up a strategy, your strategy might be, we only want to publish books that we believe will sell over 10,000 copies. So you have to kind of go in there believing this will definitely sell over 10,000 copies. Whereas if the strategy is like, we want to publish one award winner, one big blockbuster, so you would kind of take those different things into consideration. Your strategy might be, we want to try and sell as many foreign rights as possible. So like, will this book appeal to France and Germany and Spain, which are the biggest foreign markets apart from the US? Or indeed, will this do in the US? Because some publishers are very focused on the US. So like, I don't know, if this is about a British school, probably not, unless you manage to strip out all the details. So, and this is something I experienced from the author side, which is that when you do stuff set in school, unless you're doing like a kind of Eton style Harry Potter school, basically just don't have too much detail about the lesson structure, because that's going to translate worse. So I definitely took out various, I can't remember what I took out, but it was definitely some things about, maybe I didn't describe the corridor or something, so it's, or just make it sound American, because like there's that, obviously this is not for children, but Sex Education, the TV show, set in Wales, but like is very much set in America. So, you can kind of do that slightly transatlantic approach to things.
And kind of set over different decades as well. It's a bit wobbly, isn't it?
Yeah.
Any time, can it? The escape program.
But yeah, I think there's definitely things where you can absolutely, tailor your book to the market. However, I think that's often the way madness lies. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend it from a writer perspective. It might be something, but it might be something that once you've got a publisher, your publisher then says, "Oh, could we change that?" Basically, you've got a big red bus in your picture book. Could it be a big blue bus or whatever? Whatever the thing that won't work. I definitely, when I was working preschool books, we'd often have to draw the cars basically going down the middle of the road so that you could sell them in countries that drove on the left and countries that drove on the right.
That's interesting.
So if you ever see like a book for babies, you may not see what side of the road it's driving on.
Very good. Never wouldn't have thought of that at all. And then obviously you're talking about the sales modelings and all. It is a business at the end of the day, and that's obviously a huge factor in these meetings.
So so the sales team are many sales teams are very interested in what we call comp titles, which is basically like, this is perfect for fans of X. So, this book is perfect for fans of the Monster in the Library. So you kind of want to have a book that they'd recognize, that's quite recent, preferably last 5 years, unless it's really famous. So you could still reference Artemis Fowl or Skullduggery Pleasant if you wanted to, but, generally something recent and something that is a big hit. But there isn't David Walliams, because there's no point. I mean, that's not going to help you with your sales projections. It may help in terms of genre, so I think they'll often pick a few, and the editor will provide those titles often. They'll be the one that suggests them. So the sales team would then comp against those books. You normally do your own sales research before you go into acquisition, so you will very much know how much those books sold. So the sales team won't take you by surprise. So you wouldn't say a comp title for like that only sold 5,000 copies. You'd want one that sold 30,000 to make you look good. And then sales will be like, no, that's not true. This one is not going to sell that many. But especially if there's kind of like limitations such as, we don't think this will work in foreign markets. This book would be offensive in China or whatever it is. Like a big book of maps of Taiwan, you're not going to sell that in China. So you definitely have to factor those things in. Doesn't mean you don't publish it. It just means you have to be aware of that's what the limitation is, and
manage expectations.
Yeah, and sometimes there will be a kind of moral reason to publish a book, which moral's perhaps the wrong word, but like a kind of corporate responsibility reason to publish a book, as in it's kind of important for the moment. I don't know, about a book about consent or something, say that is kind of like society needs those books. It may not make loads of money, but actually it's something quite important. And as a publisher of books for children, you do have a certain kind of standing in the community almost, where you do have a bit of a moral purpose behind what you do.
Yes.
But mostly it's about the books that will sell a lot.
Okay, I'm going to ask a bit of a contentious question, possibly.
Go for it.
So if we speak about author advances as well, I know that's something you mentioned earlier, but what determines who should get the big advantages, the big advances even over those who don't? And then this is the more contentious element. What do you think of the seemingly ever-increasing feature of children's celebrity authors taking up so much of the market, obviously having mentioned David, etc.?
Excellent.
You don't need to answer that if you don't want to.
So advances first. I would say, basically, I think the biggest factor is normally how good at hype your agent is. Okay. So basically, can they trail it? Can they whisper in a few ears before they actually send it out there? Can they send it out at the right time when people aren't flooded? And also, how good is that kind of hook of the pitch, which is partly about how your book's written, but also is how that can be distilled. So people often talk about like hooky books and quiet books, and quiet books may get a large advance, but normally it would be the hooky books, like X meets Y in a world of blah. Often if it has something that feels a bit timely, that's good. So, if, I don't know, climate change is a big thing, if it's set in a climate change context. So horribly cynical conversations go on in acquisitions about like, climate change, killing everyone, but it's a hook, So, so hype is definitely big. I think, honestly, luck is the biggest reason people get big advances. It's just timing. It just happens to be that publisher happens to have that budget at that moment. Maybe they're expanding. Maybe they want to make a statement, and it just happened. And sometimes it is that kind of like particular kind of, it just happens to hit the national moment for some reason. Like, I don't know, escapist things doing quite well in lockdown, that kind of thing. So you want or kind of stuff about racial equality in the context of Black Lives Matter. There'll be these things where things are happening in the world that impact what happens in the acquisition room. And then I would also say the hype then translates into, can an auction be generated? Now, an auction could just be between two publishers. It doesn't have to be like multi-way. But as soon as two publishers want it and are offering money, that will raise the stakes. So, so I think you can also have something called a preempt, where if a publisher is really keen on it, they'll just offer a large sum of money to take it off the table, which often ends up being about the same amount as you might get in an auction if it wasn't a big auction.
Okay.
So that would get you into the like 100 grand territory, normally for a couple of books, but still. Whereas I'd say, like a very, very, healthy advance would be like, 40,000 for 2 books. That's, I don't know if it's above average, but definitely like you shouldn't be. And I got a very small advance for my first novel. Well, multiple novels, but like it was a small, per novel. And then much bigger one for the next. So you just don't know what's coming in a way. And I think, but I definitely think, agent, auction, timeliness.
Yeah, and I suppose as well that if it can be a double-edged sword, can't it? If you are given a huge advance, but then you don't earn it out, then there's that pressure when it comes to doing your next book, isn't it? Because the expectation has been lowered.
Because while I would say in some ways a huge advance makes you have a better chance of succeeding, because the publisher will then want to protect their investment and spend more on marketing. But that is no guarantee, and publishing is always gambling, so it could fall flat. I mean, there's some cases where it's bombed in the UK, but actually it sold loads of foreign rights, so no one really minds too much, apart from the poor people at the UK sales team. But yes, so it might seem like a failure in the UK, but actually for the publisher, it's made them plenty of money. Some people are bigger in certain territories. There's people who there's English writers who don't really have UK book deals who have a massive one in Germany. So it's kind of it's a global picture as well. And I think publishers are increasingly thinking globally in those terms. Absolutely.
So how can you become a lead book? I know publishers will have a lead book for the season, won't there? Is there any sort of specific determination as to how that works? Or
I'm just trying to think. I think basically you'll probably, by getting a large advance, become the lead book, unless you're at a smaller publisher where the advances are never large, in which case you could be a lead book without a big advance. I would say these things aren't set in stone from the beginning, and they can change. So for instance, if you became Waterstone's Book of the Month, you'd become the lead title pretty quickly, so suddenly there'd be marketing budget that wasn't available before. So I think it does depend on how your book hits as well. So if Waterstone's Book of the Month, I would say, was one of the biggest determiners of whether a debut is going to do well. There's only been a few that have done mega well without being Waterstone's Book of the Month.
Okay.
So that's definitely so basically to be Waterstone's Book of the Month, you got to be not too magical, maybe a little bit magical, quite nostalgic, and not too genre.
Okay. Trying to make a tick for all of those.
It's a very moving target. And for 1 year, all of them were blue covers as well, but that's not true this year.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, someone actually put them next to each other. Sorry, what were you saying?
So you maybe do get a bit of a trend, don't you? I think with the Twilight books, when they had the black and the red and stuff.
Yeah.
Other books come out after that as well.
And in the context of Waterstones, it's one children's buyer's taste as well. So obviously they're going to be a bit of, what's it called? Harmony, because you tend to have harmonious taste, even though you're, it's not necessarily their taste. It's what they perceive the market's taste to be.
Yeah. Okay, that's interesting. And if
I thought one more reason that you might become a lead title is if you get really big take up in supermarkets. So basically, if the sales team goes and picks up your book and all the supermarkets like, let's stock this, because it's supermarket sales that move the biggest volume. Like Waterstones is great, amazing, but actually more people go to supermarkets and more books are sold there. So it's very hard to get into supermarkets, but once you're there, it just gives you a much better chance.
Yeah, I was going to say when you go to supermarkets, it's always a very narrow, broad, narrow
Mm,
range of the same authors that you see absolutely everywhere, and that kind of
yeah.
feeds back a little bit to the celebrity culture
Oh
too,
yeah.
and
Sorry,
the
I missed.
fact that no,
I
well, it's just the fact that that seems to be
skipped
much more
over that one.
prevalent in children's books, doesn't it, than it does in adult books, which is
Yeah.
I don't know why that is. So
So, I mean, I think it's partly because people are much more likely to buy a book if they recognise the name on the cover. Often these celebrity authors are actually not celebrities that the children will necessarily recognise. It's just their parents. So, like David Walliams, the parents will have watched him on telly when they were young, or young, teenagers, whatever. And so it's kind of, oh yeah, that guy. And so there's quite a lot of like 90s comedians now churning them out. So I don't know, maybe it's a 20-year cycle or whatever, however long it takes you to go and have children.
and I suppose it's the
Children's
children, they're not often the ones that are actually buying the books, are they? It's the other people that are.
No,
So that
but once a book gets big, then the children do pester for it. So they'll definitely be like, "I want Wimpy Kid. I want David Williams."
yeah.
So there is well, they don't purchase it themselves normally, or unless they've got pocket money, they will kind of pester for it. So once you can get into the consciousness of children, that's brilliant. I've no idea how you do that. That's like a miracle, word of mouth, playground kind of magic.
Okay, so at the start we mentioned covers meetings, and you said they
Mm,
could be a little bit brutal.
yes.
So yes, do you want to expand?
So basically, as acquisitions are to editors, cover meetings are to designers. So basically, designers will spend a week, 2 weeks doing a beautiful cover. They pour their heart and soul into it, and then it gets absolutely torn apart by everyone. So basically, they'll normally we'll have the first stage, which is the covers briefing, which is fine. That's just the editor pitches the book and says what the strap line on the book's going to be, what kind of market they're going for. Everyone agrees that that's the market positioning. Then the designer goes away and designs it. They get an artist to do it, to actually draw it, and then they bring it back. And yeah, it'll be like, oh yeah, I like it, but actually let's change the title, or oh no, we don't want a picture of a girl, and it's like the main character is a girl. So you'll have these slightly ludicrous discussions that are around market positioning that actually, because often not everyone will have read the book. You know what I mean? Like the kind of often like a key person from each department will read it, but not literally everyone who's in the meeting. So there's a lot of that kind of like back and forth, and people change their minds because everyone's human. Sometimes something will change, like you'll realize that, I don't know, this cover actually is doing really well, so maybe we'll make it look a bit more like that. Because there will be those kind of conscious trends where, I don't know, like bright yellow covers are doing really well at the moment. Why don't we make this one bright yellow? And it's not a science; it's just something where people seem to be picking up this color a lot. So you get, I mean, I guess like with fashion, really, you have like this season's color palette, so people will go in certain directions. But I think what's brutal about the covers meeting is there's so little time in them, so you're always having to move along to the next thing. So it's basically kind of designers not always the most like loving presenting sort of people. So it's sort of like asking them to be under a massive spotlight and to say things really quickly when like images are their life, not words. And But yeah, I think it's just a real distillation of everyone trying to work out what the book is, and they may have decided before, but then they change their mind when they see it. So I think as a writer, you'd never want to be in a covers meeting because it would just be a brutal kind of ignoring everything you care about in your book. Especially like straplines don't necessarily truly reflect the content of the book; they reflect what would make someone want to buy that book. And I think, again, seeing both sides of the fence, that's really helped me, because I've had straplines where I'm like, well, literally that isn't true in the book, but actually I see why it works as a marketing line.
Okay.
Or like the cover of actually, no, I can't say that, it's not really revealed yet. Anyway, there's a cover where there's something that's not literally true about the book, but artistic license, it totally works.
Okay.
So I think, yeah, or like even the monster in the lake. It looks like it's in a jungle. Kit never actually goes into a jungle, but it's again, it sort of looks cool, and actually she's just in her local park, but it makes it look more exciting. So I think it's not always thinking about accuracy. So yeah, there's
How much input do authors have themselves into covers, or does that depend on their obviously their contracts and things?
I think, I mean, it depends on how important the author is.
Okay.
As in, like, if you're like a lead title, especially if you're, and I don't mean celebrity author in the sense of like Williams, I mean, like, if you're Presta Cowell, I'm sure you get a lot more say in your covers. Author illustrators definitely have a bit more say just by merit of the fact that they're doing the drawing themselves. So, you can't really do it without their involvement. Again, I think it varies very much publisher to publisher. Often it'll be like the editor says to the author, here's our cover draft. Everyone's very excited about it, which means, please God, do not say you want anything changed, because I have been fighting so hard to get this agreed.
Okay.
So yeah, I think varying amounts, but please don't get your hopes up about how much say you're getting in your own cover, because a cover is there to make someone buy it. It's not there as a kind of like emblem of your soul. It's the shop window for your book. So I think that's the important thing to remember. Even if it's not an art style you massively like yourself personally, it's
Go with it.
It's there to sell it. Yeah, like they are. These people have been doing this a while. Hopefully, they should be experts. So
Yeah.
there's an element of trust and kind of ignoring what you want versus what they think your consumer would want.
Okay. So shall we move on to the different types of publishers and routes to publication then? Can you talk a little bit about those?
Absolutely. So I've worked in different types of publishers. So my publishing career started at Usborne, which is an interesting group for writers, actually, because it's a place that all the non-fiction books are written in-house. So basically it's a stable of writers, almost a bit like an advertising agency, but a bit less cool, more nerdy. And it's just basically people sitting there researching books and writing books, and then designers working with designers. So that's like, for Usborne, you wouldn't pitch a non-fiction book to Usborne because they make up their own version, their own books, and which I took sort of shorthand as in-house IP, as in intellectual property. So they keep all their own copyright, which is, as a business model, very sensible, because obviously you can then sell it wherever you like. Their fiction is standard, so the kind of standard model is author submits via agent to editor buys rights to book, but they don't actually buy the copyright. You keep the copyright, which in practice, it basically means you have more control over what's in it. So, like, let's say I wrote a book for Usborne, and then I left, which I did. They would be within their rights to completely rewrite it if they wanted to. I'd have no say in that. Whereas if you publish a book with a publisher and they want to change anything, they've got to consult you. But also then the kind of standard model is advance royalties, which means you get a lump sum when they buy the book off you, and then you get, if the book makes money, you get royalties. So which is normally when they've made back all the money that they paid.
Yes. So what do you think publishers look for in an author then?
Definitely. Can I swear?
Depends what kind.
It's a very little one.
Not baby swear. Yes.
Not a dickhead. So basically, someone who is really like easy to work with, not a diva. Obviously, that all goes out the window if you're super famous. But someone who is willing to do events, because actually, like, that kind of thing can really build buzz for a book. And you can literally hand sell quite a lot of books in events. Obviously, we're not doing them live in schools at the moment, but we'll be again. And also, I mean, there's an extent to which kind of, for the PR team to be interested in an author, you kind of want there to be a hook for the author, or at least for the book, that is something that people would want to read articles about. So I don't know, they kind of they published their first book at 90, or they I don't know, live on a farm of llamas, or they've got some kind of interesting life thing. I don't know, maybe they're kind of like a mother of 10 children, or something where there's something about them that makes it worth the Sunday Times rocking up and asking them questions. That's when the PR can get excited. Or if they've got a massive following on social media, that's also appealing. Just because you've got instantly people you can talk to, and talk about your book. So, not that everyone will go out and buy it, but let's say you've got 1 million followers on Instagram. If 1% of them buy it, that's a lot of books, So,
Sure.
So yeah, social media following is definitely a plus. But I think also easy to work with is so important, especially if you want a long-term career. Because even if you sell quite a lot of books, if you're very difficult, there's a kind of low-level sadness in everyone's lives that means that the next time it comes to acquisitions, and if they're at all in doubt, they'll turn it down.
Okay.
So you're kind of buying yourself a bit of leeway, I think, by being nice. And also, it's a small industry, so like burning bridges is a terrible idea, and actually just try and build as many as you can. So I think, well, obviously it's not quite the same as trying to get a job in publishing. I would say kind of general networking as an author is a really good thing to do. And also knowing other authors, because then you can get them to write a quote on your book. And that's always a good thing from a publisher's point of view, you know.
Yeah. So that's why the sense of community, especially in children's writing, is so
Yeah.
important.
And also not from a business perspective, but just for sanity, because I think
Yeah.
it's just really, really vital. And actually, I don't know if there's the harsh writing advice thing on Twitter. I don't know if you saw that.
Yes.
Yes, basically someone saying, you know, like, other writers aren't your friends, they want to eat you.
Your competition.
Yeah.
I saw that. Yeah.
And
that got talked down quite quickly.
Yeah, I would say in children's publishing that's not true at all. Everyone is
No.
amazingly supportive, which is a real plus, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. Just before we move on to the next one, Donna says that she wants to live on a farm of llamas. So
Okay, Donna, you go do that.
So what can authors then expect from publishers?
So, wildly varying degrees of help. So at the kind of very lowest level of support, they'll literally just print the book for you and, you know, pitch it to some bookshops, and you know, it builds from there. So I think what you really, I mean, let's say you've got you're talking to a publisher about a book that they want to publish, really want to be asking about what their marketing and PR plans are. You know, sort of, if it's PR, kind of what sort of festivals they'll pitch you to, what school events, you know, have they got a good track record of school events? And on the marketing side, so marketing is basically stuff you pay for, PR is free stuff in the kind of loosest possible terms. So on the marketing side, you know, are they going to pay for, you know, advertising across social media? Are they going to pay for potentially even like street advertising? I mean, that's quite rare, but if they are, then you know it's a big deal. I mean, there's no point advertising on the tube at the moment because no one's there, but, you know, if it's a really big deal, that's the sort of advertising you might get. Never telly, that's not, I mean, I think a telly advert costs about 25 grand, which is actually quite a large marketing budget for a book. So it would be your entire budget for one advert being shown once. So I think that's very unlikely. But then there's a lot of behind the scenes marketing stuff, like, you know, kind of sponsored Instagram content, working with influencers. So they're basically, you know, you're paying them to talk about a book. And then just kind of, you know, any sort of Amazon advertising that can trick the algorithm into making a book pop up all the time. And things like mailing lists, you know, and you actually basically have to pay to get access to mailing lists of like, I don't know, parents of children aged whatever, so that you can kind of send information about your books. So that's stuff that you may never see as an author, but it is very important happening in the background.
Sure.
And then their own social media as a publisher, which if it's a big publisher can be a big deal. And, you know, I've been working with Penguin, they had vast reach, and they had things like Puffin World of Stories, where they'd have all kinds of like video content and live events, as well as stuff just literally on their Twitter or their Instagram. So yeah, I think basically if you're getting a kind of big publisher, big book deal, you'll get a large marketing budget. There'll be a lot of activity going on, you know, when your book is launched, but also in the run-up. You might get, say, an advert on the cover of a bookseller. So again, if you see a book with a bookseller advert cover, it's probably quite big for that publisher. I don't actually know how much that costs, but it's definitely, it's not free. And I think, I suppose another thing, if you are kind of, you know, you've been given this offer of, you know, a book deal, it's finding out a bit about like how someone works as an editor, because actually that's another thing a publisher offers you is a great editor in theory. So making sure that person, I guess, like find out what they've edited before and make sure it is like actually good. And also just, you know, it's hard to guess this in advance, but like, you know, editors differ in how responsive they are. So, you know, if you're someone that gets a bit paranoid, if you don't hear them from a while, you kind of want to know, like, are you going to reply to my emails quickly? But I think really it's the how much money they're going to spend on marketing your books, the most important question.
Okay. So you've actually mentioned sort of book fairs and school visits and the book festivals, etc., which obviously we can't do just now. And I know we got a question earlier from Helen, who maybe couldn't join us, but she was wondering how the current pandemic is affecting publishers' working practices, their business plans, and also what kind of knock-on effect this has on the authors. So obviously you're not getting to go out and about and meet people in person, so that will be affecting sales.
So it has so many impacts in the way that it's impacting everyone. So for instance, like a lot of publishers are working from home with children. So I imagine they're not getting quite as much done as they normally would. They're very valiantly trying, but it's just impossible if you've got a 2-year-old climbing your leg. So things are happening slower in some cases. That said, when a publisher wants to make something happen quickly, they still can. It's not like everything stops. It's just that the average speed is probably slower. But auctions are still happening. Things happening very quickly. So there's speed. There's just like editors are people too. So emotionally overwhelming. People are having kind of sad stuff happening in their lives. So I do wonder if there is going to be a massive raft of books that are just like super comforting in about a year's time. Things, there's just sort of little things like, kind of getting author advance copies is harder because the warehouses have like a skeleton staff at the moment and they have to focus on getting the books into the bookshops. And then obviously, yes, not being able to do events. I think, some authors are doing amazingly with virtual events. I have to say I've been a bit slack so far, but I'm getting on it. And I think, publishers are also responding to that and creating, kind of virtual festivals because we can't go to book fairs. So in order to sell to foreign publishers, they're doing kind of webinars. In fact, the last time I used this software was to do a webinar in Frankfurt. So kind of doing a presentation for foreign publishers. So basically technology is definitely stepping in. Book sales were actually up in 2020, which is incredible. Unfortunately, for authors who aren't famous, that was mostly big name authors, also what's called backlist, as in things published a long time ago. Because again, it's that people reaching out for what they know. So there's, a lot of people buying the classics, probably more Enid Blyton being read than normal, that kind of thing. But I think, book like children's publishing has been surprisingly fine. It's not, people aren't going bust. There was a bit of furlough at the start, and so in terms of who's actually working, and it's a lot of that is normal. It's just obviously everyone's working from their bedroom on kind of Wi-Fi that's a bit dodgy. So I actually went on submission during the pandemic, and it was sort of like, there's a little bit of it's like it's a bit disappointing not to be able to go and meet the publishers and have their biscuits. But actually, people put together amazing presentations anyway. And I think, again, it's that like these are all very creative people, so they do find ways. So when people are pitching to authors, they will, they can't, I don't know, give them a big box of chocolates or whatever, but they can send them some, or they can, they can do, use different ways of kind of presenting the information, a lot more screen sharing than you'd normally have. But
speaking of which, I will try and share your screen at some point.
Oh,
see
yes.
if it works. But just before we do that, I think, personally, I've been to a lot of online events and book launches and festival talks, etc. And I think that has been, as Casey says there, some people are actually reaching wider audiences because it's not restricted to geographical area or travel or money.
I think it's true, and I think it's proving that there's some things that we need to keep after the pandemic. I say we, in the publishing industry, which I'm part of anymore, but anyway, they. But actually authors as well. I think basically from an inclusion perspective, I think we should keep doing virtual events because there are lots of people that, whether geographically or for other reasons, can't travel, especially during a pandemic where people are vulnerable and stuff. But generally, I think even once, if this all ends, I feel like it would be nice to have a kind of hybrid model.
Yes, I think so.
And also, I think people will just get better at doing that. So, I'm, for instance, going to an event where it's like book and ticket. So they, it's done through a local indie bookshop. And they'll send you the book before the event. So, because otherwise it's a bit hard on the author because they can't sell their book. But actually, if it's done in conjunction with a bookshop, I think that's people are finding ways around it, and I guess that'll get slicker and slicker. So you'll get to the point where it's like, as soon as you click the link, the book will arrive next day or something.
I think I'll maybe just give one more question before we go to audience questions
Yes.
then. And that is, can you speak more maybe about the pros and cons of signing with a small indie publisher versus maybe one of the big five, for example?
Okay, so so I might have been tweeting earlier about how the sausages are made,
I
and
saw that.
and I would say generally, like if you go with a small indie publisher, it doesn't feel like sausages, and there's an extent to which that's a really positive thing, because you're likely to potentially meet everyone that works for that publisher at some point as an author. So you've got that more kind of you're more of a person to them in some ways. Even if you're not their big author, there's not department after department after department where you're just a name on a form. So there is that kind of personal touch. You will potentially get kind of access to a wider range of the kind of teams. Like you might even have more senior people involved in your book just because there aren't that many people. So you have whoever's available. The advance is always going to be smaller, but then again, if you've got an agent who's got sort of decent royalty percentages, then if your book sells well, then that your advance would be small, but you'd be making royalties quicker because you'd earn that advance back. And I think sometimes if your book's a bit weird, an indie publisher's possibly better because they're much more shaped by their own taste often, and a bit less kind of like they've got shareholders to keep happy. So often it's quite eccentric people that go off and start publishers. So you can kind of have something that's potentially a bit out there. And not to say like big publishers don't publish weird books, but I just think that's maybe a consideration that slightly more likely to get your weird book in a smaller publisher. And so large publisher, more money, more marketing budget, as well as you getting more money as a what's it called advance. But there is the risk that you would get lost. So if you're not a priority title, then you could slip between the cracks a bit. Everyone's very busy, and so they're going to want to focus on the things making the big money. So I think it's that, like, in a way, it's big fish in a little pond versus little fish, big pond. Although you may end up being a big fish in a big pond, in which case, win-win. But that's a real gamble. Yeah. But also, I think it sometimes it may be that you really love what they publish, and that that in a way doesn't matter if it's big or small. If it's something where you're like, what, this publisher, I really believe in them. I find them like a force for good in society, or just like their taste is the same as mine. I'd love to be on that list because I don't know. I think as an author, I always kind of want to feel like my books are understood as well, like someone really gets my books. Because that's definitely been, sort of in terms of choice of publishers and author, I've definitely thought, the person that gets my books is who I want to go with.
Yeah. Great. So I'm going to go to audience questions now. We have a few of them that have come in. The first one is from Ruth, and she is asking, do you have any tips and do's and don'ts for social media etiquette during this time in a writer's career? I.e. what to share, what not to share, when to share, etc.
I'm the worst person to ask. I share everything all the time. I would say, like, don't moan too much because everyone's a bit sad anyway. Like, it's a balance because I think you can be really like, oh, I was having a bad day, and people like they want a bit of honesty. But I think if it's just like if all you do is moan, that's a bit exhausting. I think in terms of personal stuff, whatever you're comfortable sharing, maybe don't post pictures of your kids. I don't know, whatever your boundaries are. And pet content, always good. I think there's certain times of day when it's more worthwhile posting. Like the weekends, people less, people are busy and not seeing stuff so much, whereas they're dicking around at work during the week. So I think about 9:30 on weekday mornings is quite good because everyone's just got to their desk and can't quite bring themselves to start work yet. So, and I think someone told me that cover reveals work really well at 11 a.m. on a Friday. I don't know where that was picked from, but
That's interesting.
yeah, I don't know if there's. I mean, I'm sure there's someone who knows a lot more about social media statistics than I do that would actually be able to tell you the more scientific answer. But I think again, it's not essential to have a social media presence. You can be successful without one. But I think for me, it's been an amazing kind of community builder, and it's just been a great way to meet people. Whether other writers or editors. I'm pretty sure I met my first editor, Tom Bonnick, at Nosy Crow on Twitter first. So, way before I submitted to him, but just that kind of like, I guess, getting your name out there, but also don't do it unless you enjoy it, because it really, like, you can really tell. I think someone already said this in the marketing and PR thing, but it's just kind of like, if you're putting on a fake persona, it's never going to work. And especially if like there's one social media you like better than another. I think kind of like, I much prefer Twitter to Instagram, say, and I do Instagram, but I don't think I do it very well. But I enjoy doing it, but I'm aware that I'm not doing it in the way that Instagram wants me to do it. So I'm not very like, here's a pretty filter. It's more like, here's a horrific picture of a dead bird I found. But that's much more to amuse me than it is to build social media presence, because I just don't think, I'll put my books on there as well. But I think, again, it's like, lean into your strengths and your what you actually find fun.
Great, that's great, thank you. Laura is saying she has a cheeky question, which is, when should an author say no to a publishing offer?
Ooh, if they're proposing something dodgy, like as in you're pitching your idea and they're like, great, we'll have the copyright, please. Or if they're literally offering an amount of money that's not worth your time. So think about what you think your time is worth. And if, I don't know, if you think that there's something morally repugnant about the publisher, I wouldn't go with them. I don't know, they publish fascists or something, whatever your kind of line in the sand is. But from a career perspective, I think, taking an offer from a really small publisher as your first deal, there's nothing bad about that. And you may actually want to stay with a small publisher, or you may want to change over time. So I wouldn't be put off by it not being loads of money, or by them being small. I would say just basically, you can kind of like often tell if they're a bit shifty, and kind of fly by night. So I think basically just do your due diligence, ask around, find other people published by them, see what their experience has been. Basically get as much inside knowledge as you can, and generally people will be quite honest, like, because if an author doesn't like a publisher, they will moan about them. So you can get them to be honest, I think. And again, there's part of that networking thing, which sounds really cold, but I mean, as in building a community, means people can warn you off things that are dangerous as well. So other authors will have been in the same position or will have been burnt before, so they can warn you off.
That's great advice, thank you for that. Lou is asking, in your experience, is there a significant correlation between size of advance versus size of market budget a publisher will subsequently invest in the text? Maybe touched on that slightly. While you're answering, I'm going to see if I can get your screen up, but I'm not promising anything. So
this is not about advance sizes, by the way.
Yep,
so I would say, like, basically large advance normally means large marketing budget. But sometimes a small advance could end up with a large marketing budget if, say, you became Waterstone's Book of the Month, or won the Waterstones Prize, or won the Costa or something. There's not many prizes that make big deals of sales, but there's a few.
Oh,
so.
Did that work?
Oh, I don't know. Yes. Oh, right. Okay. Here are my books, which I was supposed to screen share at the start, but couldn't work out how. Yes. So
I just want to get that in before we finish. Because
yeah. So yes, this is my trilogy: The Dragon in the Library, The Monster in the Lake, and The Wizard in the Wood, out recently. That they're kind of 7 to 9. If you haven't read them before, please go out and buy them, especially from your local indie bookshop, which are luckily so many still operating on click and collect. If you're local to me, Stoke Newington Bookshop's the best shop, but obviously you've probably got your own favourites. And then I've got another one coming out in May called Otherland, which I haven't got a cover for yet because it's still secret.
No, is that gone? Am I back?
It's gone. We're back to
it has. Okay.
Yeah.
Phew, hadn't tried that one before we came on, so that was really smooth. Nobody noticed. It's fine. Louise is asking, are publishers looking for anything specific at the moment?
Let me think. I think this is such a hard one, because basically as soon as, if I say something that they're looking for now, they probably would have found it next week. But I do think kind of there is a bit of a sort of return to nostalgia at the moment. People wanting that kind of classic feeling story, something that feels kind of like comforting, like an idealized childhood, which goes down particularly well in Germany. There's a very kind of like desire to have that like protected vision of childhood in Germany. Don't know why, but I think, I mean, detectives still seem to be going strong, and spies to a lesser degree, and like pure escapism, you know, magic which isn't too like hardcore geeky, which I always feel is a great shame because I was a massive geeky child who wanted a magic system, but not necessarily what publishers want. And I think it is that, like, I think about what you want as well, especially if, I mean, if you're a parent or if you know parents, kind of what's on their mind at the moment, because I think there is, you know, publishing just reflects the world around it. So I think is that like the seat, you know, comfort, escape, you know, and that escape can be like into an exciting thriller. It doesn't have to be into like fluffy cloudland. It could be into murder. It's just slightly more cozy murder, or a thriller that makes you not think about your own life, you know, so being on the run in space, or whatever that is. Yeah, I keep wanting there to be a massive wave of sci-fi, and there hasn't been yet, but I still believe there will be.
Maybe it's coming.
There is a book coming from Penguin this year, I want to say, called The Upper World, which is a YA high concept sci-fi, and I think that one's going to be massive. So I'm hoping that leads to, you know, doors being, you know, blown wide open for sci-fi, just because I like it as a reader, really.
So we've maybe got time for one or two more questions, and I'm conscious that we're coming to the end here. But we have one here from Des saying, can you give a bit of insight on how the acquisitions team may approach a book that is a potential for series submission, and what does the rollout for the series look like for the timeline, etc.?
It depends on the genre. I think publishers can be quite wary of series. I think they tend to be a bit safer in the kind of detective-y genre than the fantasy, because there does tend to be fall off in sales from the first title onwards. So you're unlikely to get more than a trilogy in fantasy, whereas detectives you might get, well, you can see behind me can you see it? So the Robin Stevens books, there's many. So I think generally they might want to make sure it does work as a standalone, just in case it doesn't do very well. They might offer a 2-book deal on that. So you kind of, as a writer, have to be kind of weirdly ready to pivot, and either finish something quicker than you thought or actually spin it out longer than you're expecting. So normally they would say like with series potential, but they wouldn't necessarily commit to it being a series.
Okay, so it's important maybe that they stand alone in their own right, the first book, and then if it's successful they'll take it from there, possibly.
Yeah, and I think so. For instance, like Frost Heart is two books at the moment, but I think it might have actually been 3 from the start. I can't remember. So definitely, and the Strange Worlds Travel Agency is 3, I think. But yeah, it's generally you're not on very safe ground asking for a trilogy, but if that's what you want to write, you know, just go for it, because I think they can always say, we'll just take it as a standalone, please.
Okay. So we'll maybe just do one last question from Helen, and she's asking, how many people on average does a book have to get past before it actually reaches the shelves?
Oh, that's a good question.
That is a good question.
So, junior editor, senior editor, publisher, PR, I mean, whole department, but whatever, head of PR, head of marketing, head of sales, CEO/MD, export rights, maybe about 10 people.
All right, because Bananas was wondering if you were going to start counting on your toes there.
Yeah, I'm not counting like, oh, sorry, actually I missed that whole stage, which is pitching to the supermarkets, pitching to Waterstones. So you need the Waterstones buyer, the Sainsbury's buyer, the Tesco's buyer.
So definitely fingers and toes is what.
Yeah, sorry, but I've got focus on, so I don't want to show that.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us today. That has been a brilliant way to end this weekend of Honconference, which has gone incredibly fast. I can't believe how fast the whole thing's gone.
Yeah, I want to go back and watch half the others.
I know, me too. But I'm so glad you joined us, and I really appreciate that. There's so much insight in all your answers there. So Yes, thank you, and thank audience as well. Thank you for your
Yeah,
questions. That's been really useful.
I kind of want to go
Um,
back and read them all now.
I know. Well, that's the other thing. So the video will stay online, and the comments will be down the side, so that
Oh, fab.
you can go back and review those at your leisure as well. Just a small thing, just to remind you about Seven Stories, if you would like to donate to them. But that brings us to the end of this session, and also the Honkference weekend. Well, apart from Imogen's wrap up, obviously, which you can hop over and have a look at now. So thank you very much indeed, Louie, and that's us, I think.
Thank you. Oh, and if anyone has any more questions, I'm on Twitter as my name, so I'm always open to answering if I can.
Perfect. And the
Unless it's
dog,
about royalty
you're,
percentages, in which case ask your agent.
and Buffy, it's worth going on Twitter for Buffy alone
Oh
because
yeah, yeah.
very, very cute.
I could try and get her if we've got one moment.
Yeah, you can hold on if you
Give me
want.
1 second.
This is an extra treat, folks. You're going to get to see Buffy. She's very, very cute. So what do I do? Shall I sing a wee song, or do you want to talk amongst yourselves, or here she comes. Phew. Oh, look.
Hello.
Hi, Buffy.
He says
You're very
hi.
cute. She's a King Charles.
She is a King Charles,
Yeah,
yeah.
my parents used to have those. They're gorgeous dogs. Oh, I'm glad we stayed on for that. That's an
It's very
extra treat.
Awesome. Anyway, thank you so
Brilliant.
much everyone for coming, and please
Yes,
have
thank you.
this.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Bye.
Bye, everyone.